Okay, so this experiment was, the main purpose was for you to learn how to use a burette. Well, since you're not here, you won't actually get to use the burette, but this is what a burette looks like. It's a very long tube of glass with many markings on there, and you'll get a close-up view here. But we're going to look at that quite a bit. And then at the bottom end of it, there's a stopcock. So that way we can let volumes out the tip, and we can measure the volume very accurately, very precisely, because they have lots of markings on here. Okay, so following the procedure in the lab manual, it says use a clean burette that has been washed with detergent, rinsed with tap water, and distilled water. So this one's just a brand new, burette out of our box of burette. So first thing I'm going to do is check to see how clean it is by using some deionized water. Okay, I'm going to make sure that the stopcock is closed by making sure it's perpendicular to the glass column, so I don't end up with water everywhere. And I'm just going to put some water down the burette, and if everything goes well, you can see here there's no little beads of water stuck anywhere. That's usually where there's a piece of dirt or something like that, or some oil or something that we have to clean. But went through just fine. As you can see there it is. And then I'm just going to drain it out the tip to make sure that into the sink to make sure that the tip works fine and the stopcock works fine. And it looks like it's just fine. Okay, so we're going to dump out the distilled water as much as we can. Okay, so we've now got a clean burette rinsed with distilled water, and it then says to rinse it with a small amount of the sodium hydroxide solution. Okay, so I have a sodium hydroxide solution, and there is the concentration. Okay, so you're going to need that later. I've got a little beaker here. Just going to pour some in the beaker. And then I'm going to use this little burette funnel to fill the burette. Now, I'm not putting it in the clamp to fill the burette because I want to fill it below my eye level, so I don't accidentally get any in my eyes. Now, I'm only going to put a little bit in there, and the reason I have to rinse it with the NaOH is, I don't know if you can see this, but there's a little bit of water that stays in here. There's nothing you can do about that, right? There's always going to be a little bit when you rinse your glassware, right, that some water is still there. And that little bit of water would change the concentration. So what I need to do is rinse it with a little bit of the NaOH, and once I've rinsed it with the NaOH, I'm going to discard that and then fill it with the NaOH. So here I go to put a little bit in. Don't need that much. Okay, so you can kind of see there's some down there. Tip, about 5 milliliters or so. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to angle this, and I'm going to let the NaOH coat the whole inside of this. Then I'm going to let it run out the tip to make sure that that's all good. And so I'm just going to kind of lean this back and forth a little bit here to rinse out all the sides of the burette. And what you're doing is you're just trying to rinse out any water that might be in there. And and then I have to get the tip, just a little bit of the stuff out of the tip. Okay. And then I'm just going to dump out that, because that NaOH, we don't know what the concentration is because of the water that diluted it. All right, so now, now the little bit of stuff that might be in here, anything that's in here, is going to more than likely be roughly the same concentration as the NaOH stock bottle. And so now I'm going to fill this above the 0 line here. So I got to put a whole bunch in there. We have to get some more on the stock bottle. So plant that. All right. Again, say take it down when you're going to fill it, so it's below your eye level. Okay, so I filled it above the top mark here. There's the top mark. So I filled it above there. Why? Because I still have an air bubble down here in my tip. And so I've got to release that air bubble. Get all the air bubbles out of there. All right, and what I'm going to need to go a little more. All right. So now I am down below the 0 mark. And so this is now ready to go with NaOH. So I've got my burette set up to doing for the titration. Now, I'm going to pause this and then I'll show you the setup and we'll get the vinegar and we'll get ready for the titration. Okay, so I have my NaOH in the burette. Okay, so you can kind of see that. And then it's using a burette clamp here to attach it to a ring stand. And there's my stopcock. And underneath the ring stand I have a stir plate. Okay, so we don't have to swirl it manually. We got the magnetic stir. And we've got our 2 Erlenmeyer flasks. That's what we're going to put the vinegar, a sample of vinegar into each one. Sample 1 and 2. We've got our little magnetic stir bars, that's going to go in there. We're probably going to put some water in there, and this is our indicator, which is phenolphthalein. Okay, so not that you need to know how to spell that, but that's the name of it. Okay, and so we're going to add some drops of that. That's going to turn color when we get to the end point of our titration. Okay, so now I'm going to pause it again, and then we're going to read the burette for the vinegar and dispense the vinegar. Okay, so we have the vinegar in another burette. Okay, so the idea for this experiment is that the vinegar being in one burette, each student would come over and get the sample out of this burette, and we would make sure that you guys know how to read the burette correctly before you would go and do the titration with the NaOH in my other burette that you guys each would set up. Okay, so I've already rinsed it, cleaned it, filled it with vinegar, and I'm just going to show you here on how to read the burette. So this here is going to be our initial volume, and if you look at the burette, you can see, right, that line up there, that one that goes all the way around, is the 12 line. The one down here is the 13, so this one here that's a little bit longer, that's 12.5, and so if you count up, you get 12.4, 12.3, and it's definitely below 12.2, and it's basically between 12.2 or 12.3, and then you can kind of see it's between those two, between 12.2 and 12.3. So at that point, you have to make a guess. So the lines are at every 1/10 of a milliliter. And so you need to guess. It's definitely more than 12.2 because the bottom of the meniscus, the bottom of the curve, is below the 12.2 line, but it's not quite to the 12.3 line. So it's somewhere in between. Now you may say 12.25, but that's would be right in the middle, right? Is it closer to 12.2 or is it closer to 12.3? Now, one of the things you note is if I tilted the camera up or down, if I looked at it from a lower angle or from a top angle, that's going to change that just a little bit. So you always have to read a burette at eye level. Okay, so for this one, and I'm going to look directly instead of through the camera lens, I would say maybe 12.23 or 2.24. If you said 12.25, that would be fine as well. Okay, but that is your initial volume. Okay, so I opened the stopcock and let out the vinegar out the bottom, and I didn't videotape that because it's not all that interesting. But here we are now at the end volume. So I went a little bit below 22 so we could get roughly 10 milliliters. And so now we need to record the final volume that went into on the burette, the final reading on the burette, so we could calculate how much vinegar we put into the flask. Okay, so if you look at this again, if you're counting down, right, that one's 22 up here, this line. This line down here is 23. This one here in the middle, that's a little bit longer, is 22 and a half. Right, so it increases going down. So it's the bottom of the curve. It's below the 22.4, but it doesn't hit the little bit longer line, the 22.5. So it's between 22.4 and 22.5. Maybe 22.41 or 42, something like that. Okay, so I have my 10 milliliters of vinegar that we just, roughly 10 milliliters of vinegar that we dispensed out of the burette in my Erlenmeyer flask here that says number 1. Okay, and then it says in that Erlenmeyer flask you want to add approximately 15 milliliters of deionized water. Okay, so I've got my here a deal of deionized water, and I've got my graduated cylinder. So I'm just going to measure out 15 milliliters of water, and it says it doesn't have to be super accurate, but it can be close. Okay, so I'm going to add some water to it. And the main reason to add some water is just to have enough of a level down in here so when you're stirring it with the magnetic stir bar, it doesn't clank around too much. Okay, so I need to add that magnetic stir bar, and here we go. So you just kind of slide that down in, you don't drop it in. All right, so there it is. And then I'm going to put it on our stir plate here. So I'm going to need to lift the burette that has the NaOH in it and put it on here. Okay, and then you turn on the stir bar, and hopefully it's not too fast. Okay. Oops. Okay, this stir plate seems to be a little out of control, even on the lowest setting. I'm going to get a different stir plate. Okay, so that worked a little better. This stir plate's working a little better. And you can see I've got it in there and it's stirring up there fine. So before I can do anything though, I still need to add my indicator. So it says to add 2 drops of your phenolphthalein indicator. So I'm going to go ahead and add that. 1, 2. Okay, you can see nothing happened. All right, phenolphthalein is colorless when it's acidic, and vinegar is acidic. And so, but it'll turn a red color or a pink color when you get enough base in there. Okay, and so that's what we're going to end up looking for. But before we do that, we have to read the burette, the initial volume on the burette for the NaOH. Okay, so I've adjusted the camera so you can see the initial reading on the burette. I had to lower the burette, so that's why the stir plate is off. But I am not going to read this one off for you. This one here is for you to read the burette. Okay? So that value there, whatever you're going to read it, that is your initial volume on your NaOH for sample 1. Okay, so we're ready to begin titrating. You can see the Erlenmeyer flask there. I've got the stir bar spinning. Let me turn the label on the flask away so you can see this. All right. Okay, we'll get the stir bar going a little faster. And now I'm going to start adding the NaOH. Now you'll see where the NaOH hits the solution, it'll turn pink for a second. We got to make sure to get the whole thing pink. And so you just add it from the tip here. And you can start off, you add a decent amount because we're not close to the end point. And if you're good, you can get it to set up so it'll add drop by drop, like so. Okay, and sometimes this just takes a while, especially with the first one because we don't know how much it's going to take. I mean, the second one will go faster because we'll know how much we're going to take, but we're also, I'll pause the thing in between, but I want you to see kind of the whole thing for one of them. Okay, so I think we're getting closer here. Okay, so we're still going here in the titration. Okay. It's taking more than I thought it would. Okay, we're getting really close here.
I think that looks pretty good.
Okay.
I mean, it's just
Faint
just
pink?
a very, very faint pink.
Okay, so it's a very faint pink according to Dr. Pienta, who's better judging at these colors than I am, because I'm colorblind. I'm going to add one drop more,
I think that'd be good, yeah.
and we'll see what we get here. If I can get that one drop.
Yeah.
All right.
That looks good.
So then it's
That's good, yeah.
it's a very faint pink color, which is what we're looking for. All right, so now we just have to read the final volume on the burette. Now the pink color doesn't stay because it absorbs CO2 from the atmosphere. So you're just looking for that first time of pink color. And so I'm going to refocus it to read the burette. Okay, so from here you should be able to see the final reading on the burette. You can see the number up here is 35, and then if I slide that down, the card down here a little bit, the card is just there to provide us with a nice background so we can read it. You can see that that's 36, and so it's a little below 36. And again, let's see if we can slide it down so you can at least see. All right, so it's 36, and that one line that's a little longer is 36.5. So you can kind of read off the value there. Okay, now we're going to get set up for titration number 2. Okay, so I'm going to dispense some more vinegar for sample number 2. Okay, and so this is the initial reading on the vinegar burette before we started dispensing anything. So you need to read that value. Let's see, that looks like it's the meniscus is a little below, right? It's below 22.4, but it's not quite to the 22.5 line. So you may want to say somewhere in between there. Okay, kind of depends on where we get that shadow. See if I can sharpen that up a little bit. Okay, so you can see it's almost touching 22.5, but not quite. So maybe 22.48 or 9, something like that. Okay, so I've added vinegar to sample number 2, and this will be the final reading on that burette of the for the vinegar. And so you can see it's below 31, which is way up here at the let's see, 31, which is way up here. 32 is the long line, it's underneath the number there. And so I'm going to slide this card down a little bit so you can see that a little better. And so now you just have to read off where the bottom of the meniscus is. And if you look at it, remember you got to be at eye level here. So we're looking at, it doesn't quite touch the 32 line, but it's below the 31.9. So it's somewhere between 31.9 and 32. So maybe 31.97, maybe 6, something like that. Okay, so I've got our second sample that has the vinegar in it. Again, I cleaned off the stir bar and rinsed it with some deionized water, so I'm going to put that into our second flask. I need to add the deionized water again, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. It has to be 15 milliliters, roughly. And then we got to add our 2 drops of indicator again. All right, I've already refilled the burette, so I'm going to pause that, move the camera so we can read the initial value on the burette and get our sample starting to stir and get ready for the titration. Okay, so this is now the initial reading on the burette for the second titration. This is the initial reading on the NaOH. Okay, so the sodium hydroxide. And so I'm going to let you go ahead and take that reading. All right. Okay, so we've started titrating. We've already added a good amount of NaOH, and we're getting closer to the end point. And so we're going to go here. Let's see if we can get to the, again, the faint pink color is what we're looking for. Dr. Pienta is again here to help me tell the color, because it's not my strong suit. I don't want you to all have
slow down a little bit.
Don't want you to have bad data just because of my poor eyesight.
Yeah, wait. It's mildly pink, so I do probably one more drop. That looks good.
Okay,
Yep.
so that's the pink color we're looking for. At least that's what he tells me. So now I'm going to refocus this and we'll get the final reading on the burette. Okay, so now I've got it focused here on the burette so you can read the final volume for the NaOH for trial number 2. Alright, so you can see the top number here is the 33. The bottom number there is 34. And so you're going to need to judge where that bottom of that meniscus, the bottom of the curve, shows up. Okay. There is one last thing I need to show you for this video. Okay, so I'm focusing in on the lab notebook, or the lab manual, because on step 9 of the calculations there, you can see I've rewrote that. It says line 4 times the ratio from the equation. It should say line 8 times the ratio of the equation. So there's a typo, and that's going to really confuse you if you don't get that. So make sure to make that change. All the rest of the calculations, it does kind of tell you what to do on each step. So you might be able to do this on your own, but if you have any questions about the values, we'll be talking about this next week in the lab time. Thank you.